Now that we have our loaner table, let's start to explore how do we build this relationship between the loaner and the book. Now, the simple way to do that would be to say, well, the loaner can check out a book. So what we need is probably a book foreign key or some sort of reference to the book ID. So we could simply say book underscore ID int, and then we could allow it to be null. And then by allowing it to be null, if it's null, then there's no book checked out. If it's not null, if it carries a value, then it's checked, or a book is checked out. So, wait, let me start over. If book underscore ID is null, there's no books checked out, and if book underscore ID has a value, there is a book that is checked out. That's what I meant to say. Alright, so with that, what we need though is that works for us, but it has a lot of limitations. First limitation is the loaner can only check out one book. Now, how realistic is that? Have you ever been to the library and only been allowed to get one book? The second problem is we have no history of what books this person has checked out in the past. Now, as a very data-driven society, that's a big deal for us. We want to be able to know, what interests does this person have? Can we find correlations, data mining, blah, 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 blah. All those big, great things. So along those lines, we have no data to do that. So we would have to create another table in order to track that, which means that as our application development side of the work goes, we'd have to then spit out that data into another table. May or may not be the best way to do it. And then how do we know when the book was checked out? How do we know when the book is due back? All of that type of stuff can't be tracked or maintained with one field. And because of that, there's a lot of these problems that we need to address. So how do we address them efficiently, and how do we make it so that everything works as we expect? So what we're going to do is we're going to establish another table. And this table will be what's referred to as a many-to-many table. So instead of putting book ID inside of the loaner table, we're going to actually create a new one. So I'm going to close loaner, do a quick refresh here. We now have a loaner table. And then what we're going to do is we're going to need to establish a many-to-many table. And the reason why it's called a many-to-many table is that you should be able to say the phrase, many loaners have many books. So that would mean that there's a loaner that has multiple books, and on the flip side, there could be multiple books checked out by multiple loaners. So if you had multiple copies of the same book, that book could then be checked out by multiple people. So having this relationship where you can have many people taking one thing on one side of your database relationship, and on the flip side you have many books being checked out by a particular user, that's where you need to have this many-to-many relationship. And so what we need to do to represent that is we need to have a many-to-many table that implements that type of relationship. So remember, we're building relational databases, so the goal is to establish those relationships. So we're going to go new table, and then we need to talk about what columns need to be in here. So to start out simply, we're going to need the book ID, so the ID or primary key of the book, and we're not allowing that to be null. And then we need a loaner ID, and that's the ID or primary key of the loaner. So what happens now is that we have a book ID and a loaner ID. So then together we can say this loaner checked out this book, and then we can say the same loaner ID checked out another book, so book ID 2. Then this same loaner checked out a third book, book ID 3. And just for clarity, I'm actually going to swap these around just so that that concept parallels what I just said. So now, saving this, personally I like to give my tables names that help reflect what the foreign key or many-to-many relationship is. So I'm going to call this the book underscore loaner table. Or actually, we'll call it the loaner underscore book table because it's the loaner books. It's the books that the loaner is taking. Again, it doesn't really matter. It's all up to preference, but just so I can keep my terminology consistent, that's what I'm going with. Now, this still does not address all of our problems, but it's at least a good starting point. So we now have these two things. The last thing I'd like to recommend is that we can actually create a primary key using multiple columns. So by selecting both columns, I can right click and say set as primary key. And what that basically means is that when there's a loaner with a book, that book and that loaner together create a unique row. So that way that person can't check out the same book multiple times, and you don't run into issues of duplicate data or data missing in particular columns. So we'll go ahead and save that. And we now have created our loaner book table.